Welcome back to Restorative Justice Reflections, the show where we take time to analyze what's happening in media, news, sports, pop culture, and ask restorative questions to help us make sense of it all. I'm your host, David Ryan Barcega Castro Harris, and today I'm here with DW McCraven to discuss one of the things that's been at the center of the sports world, the suspension of JA Morant as a result of gun possession and other things. DW, how's it going?
It was good, homie. How you doing?
I am well. In transparency, we have just spent the last hour and a half talking to each other about all the things that have been going on in DW's life and their restorative justice work. We're going to air that full conversation on Thursday, but DW and I connected a while ago, but they resurfaced on Instagram and TikTok as the restorative homie, sharing restorative perspectives on different things that are going on in the world. And as a basketball fan, your perspectives on what was going on with JA Morant, and not so much that situation, but the responses from people in the NBA and the media were really energizing for me. I was like, y'all, we got to have this conversation. So as a recap, JA Morant, for those of you who are uninitiated, is the point guard for the Memphis Grizzlies of the NBA. At this point, 2 or 3 weeks ago, he was in a strip club in Denver and decided to go on Instagram Live. And during that video, he flashed a handgun. The next day, the sports media world was Twitter was up in arms, right? Yeah. And pretty quickly, JA put out a statement saying that he was taking time away from the team. The Memphis Grizzlies expressed similar sentiments, and opinions started flowing. DW, when you saw this happen, what was your reaction?
Well, okay, a lot of the information I sit with it, but I thought to myself, I really hope that people don't head in the demonization space, right? Because in athletics, specifically, it's just athletic culture, we have this blame thing. Someone has to be held responsible, so accountability. Someone has to be held accountable to this. But rather peel back the layers and think about, as we were talking before, what does accountability look like, right? And what does this culture look like? Not an isolated incident, which I said on IG. If it's not an isolated incident, how do we look at ourselves as leaders? Figure this out.
And so when we think about a restorative process, thinking about what happened, what was going on before, what was going on underneath the surface for folks, who was impacted and how, and like what needs to be done in order to make things right. I think that might be a helpful framework for us to talk through some of these things. As you were saying, like, this is not an isolated incident. What did you mean by that?
What I mean is that even when you go and you watch Jay Williams or Jalen Rose talk about this, it's happened before. There's not the first time there's been guns in the league. It's, this person happens to be a huge superstar. Right. But it's not the first time that situations have gone down. It won't be the last time. So this tells me that in leadership, if we're thinking about restorative leadership, that there's something that's happening that needs adjusting. There's something that's happening in the culture that needs to be shifted, because we may not know people the way we think we know people. Because if we do, then we know that there's some sort of shift that needs to be happening. Right. So just even thinking about that, even thinking that you're having these people coming from certain communities and you have these expectations for them, and they get on this main stage, whether it be in the WNBA, whether it be in the NBA, whether it be in NCAA, because the NIL deal and people getting paid now in NCAA, shout out to getting paid. But thinking about how do you frame this thing, having these people come from environments where they have nothing, that have been deeply affected by caste systems. And then you're asking them to step into these very rich environments in terms of like monetarily, and then behave in these culturally constricted ways in which they don't do that where they come from.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's a couple of things, right? When I think about like a restorative process, thinking about like maybe an iceberg, what's on top of the surface is like behaviors that you see. So like, JA Morant flashes a gun on Instagram Live. There have also been incidents of him allegedly, right, showing up and instigating violence or commotion, whether at the behest of his mom, sister, or, his personal honor being challenged by a 17-year-old child, right? We have like all of these incidents on the top, and what's under the surface for him is like probably some idea of masculinity that is not conducive to the way that you and I want to move in the world, right? But also like around that iceberg, right, the water that surrounds it, are these things that you're talking about, like this culture of guns, and like the way that Black people's bodies have been commodified into products for, multi-billion-dollar corporations to profit off of. And so when we're thinking about, Ja and all the pressures that are like put on him in these situations, right? Like we can have sympathy for a person who is under a tremendous amount of stress while still disagreeing with like the ways that he's choosing to release that stress, right? Or express anger, or, the behaviors that led to all of this. And, still acknowledge that like there's a person there who needs love, support, which, is so much of what we talked about in our conversation that's going to air Thursday. There was like a difference in the way that this incident was talked about versus many things that have happened in the past, thinking about Gilbert Arenas back in the day, or Steven Jackson and Jamal Tinsley, or even Allen Iverson, although those weren't necessarily having to do with guns. And I think because there are so many more Black media members, there has been like a lot more of a sympathetic or understanding perspective that has been expressed publicly. And of course, there have been like people who are going down that demonization route. Those aren't the Twitter spheres that like I was trafficking in. But the other thing that I was seeing, like the demonization, the sympathy and understanding and challenge to like be better and don't lose your opportunity. There was also this undercurrent of, hey, you made it. Like, why are you trying to be a gangster?
Right. And me thinking about that, I was like, yo, these are whole ass human beings. You're asking someone to not be themselves. Like, can you imagine? We were even talking about misgendering people. What I'm saying is that you have people not being able to be human, right? And not being able to come into spaces with their entire humanity, knowing that we're built for quote unquote mistakes. Like we're built to be in process. So when someone comes into a space and you have this expectation, it can be overwhelming to have to shift everything that you know about the world. When every day you're taught that green lights you go through green lights every single day for, I don't know how old Ja is, 22, 23? 23 years you're going through green lights, and then one day someone says, actually, you're going to stop at this green light. I can't imagine how the world would be blown up for you to be thinking about that and saying like, you have to do this thing. There's no easing your way into it. There's no way you can talk about it, that kind of piece. And so when I'm thinking about framing someone's humanity, when you move into these situations, it's like, how do we pay attention to all of the different circumstances that may have occurred or are happening in this moment that led up to this piece, this one thing? And then how do you hold that space and say, like you said, it's not an isolated incident. What are all these other things that happen? And how come we didn't have agreements up until that point, right? To be able to question those thoughts of, why is it just this person that has this issue? It doesn't absolve them of what's happening, but how do we look at the other pieces that come into play? Because it's never just one entity.
Yeah. And when we're talking about, the commodification of people's bodies and their substances, and, when we're all participating in capitalism, all of our employers are commodifying like our time and labor, Ja Morant specifically and NBA superstars as a whole, right, are seeing more than just like the stats that you can produce on a basketball court, right? That's important. But, the marketing of the game so people tune in to watch, the marketing of the game so people come and attend the game, all the marketing deals that individuals might have to endorse brands, right? The perspectives that each of those corporate entities are asking these young men to take on is a lot. And there's not always this care for the whole person built into that process. And so when things like this happen in past circumstances, right, there might have been immediate suspension or immediate long-term suspension, right? There might have been contracts revoked. In this instance, right, the messaging that came out pretty much across the board is like, hey, we stand by Ja, and we're taking this time. He's taking this time to get help, right? And, as of this airing, he is due to come back from what was an 8-game suspension after spending some time away, going down to a counseling center in Florida, and having conversations with team and league administrators about the progress that he's made and steps that he's going to take going forward, and making a public apology. All of those things have happened, and the way that he's going to continue to live up to those agreements that he's made with people remains to be seen. But as you've witnessed all of this, like, what do you hope that people learn from this? Because I should have said at the beginning, you and I do not know the ins and outs of Ja Morant's life, or the lives of the people going, who are employees of the Memphis Grizzlies, or all that. And so, everything that we're saying is observation from the information available to us. And if we're wrong about things, we own that. We have limited perspective on this. But given the information that we have, what do you hope that people learn from what's happened with this restorative lens?
I think about how shifting from take the person out of the situation and there's no more problem, or that person, that's the bad apple. Like this theory that there's bad apples, when rather there's systems that are creating these things. There are systems that are not working for people. So to understand that if there are systems that are not working for people, you're still going to have instances where these things occur. So if you're saying there's a lot of healing that needs to occur, what does that healing look like? Really to facilitate and be able to step into understanding that we have to have proactive approaches. And that's not saying the league has training programs, but it's the same thing that we said about training and restorative work. It's lifelong. You don't learn about finances in 2 hours or 2 months. It's lifelong. So just really looking at things from a lens, and some people may already be doing this, right? So there's not an assumption there, but taking home and understanding that there are many perspectives to this, and considering what people may be holding in those moments. We don't know what Ja was holding. We don't know what even the newscasters were holding when they got there. They could have been triggered by this particular incident, and it was like, you're the blame, right? But how to that responsibility, and just understanding perspectives, and then taking responsibility where we need to. Yeah.
And I think there's a whole nother conversation that's to be had about us as consumers of the product that is the NBA, placing our values on people who we don't know and aren't in real relationship with, like parasocial relationships, real, and to project our values on these corporations or these people, probably isn't the most healthy way to move through the world. I think about Charles Barkley saying, I'm not a role model, right? Athletes aren't role models. Athletes are whole people who are moving throughout the world. You as a parent, or you as a young person, should be building relationships with people in your community and building that way. But yeah, still please buy my shoes. I guess that was Charles Barkley's message in that commercial. But it's on us to continue to explicitly have these conversations within our own communities. And so when incidents like this happen, we have agreements to hold each other to, right? And we have ways of dealing with them, right? I know within the context of the NBA handbook, there are rules about bringing guns to the team facilities. And that's not what happened in this case, or that's not what the investigation found in this place. Ja was doing this on his own time in a strip club, but there are morality clauses. And so in those gray areas, when the conduct is detrimental to, the team, the league as a whole, right? What are the things that we're going to put in place to make sure that these things don't happen again, and the person who has caused the harm and the people who have been impacted are getting the support that they need. I'm not going to judge whether or not the process that went on was restorative or not. I would lean towards not maybe fully holy, but again, like you and I don't know the ins and outs of what happened. We can only hope for the best for Ja moving forward. And, all young people who are looking up to him and everybody involved.
No, I mean, I agree. I think there's many situations, even when I think about the Brittany Griner situation, which is here's this unique situation as well, where you're in this position and nobody knows what to expect, right? And there's a whole bunch of healing that needs to take place because so many people are impacted by it, right? And like forwarding over to this situation is like, you have this situation where so many people are harmed. And I'm just curious about how is this addressed from quote unquote top to bottom or from in to out?
Yeah.
Like what does that look like? And I want that for the NBA. I want that for the people who are there. Even, one of the NBA players, Dame, was saying was talking about culture recently in the NBA and what that meant for Dame, on a podcast. And so I think there's many perspectives that we can look at, and there's not one person to blame for the situation, but there are many people that can shift the camera or the lens on themselves and say, okay, what do I need to shift here in order for for anybody to be seen, and for there to be an understanding from rookies who are coming into the league down to veterans? How can there's got to be some sort of shift, because when you have, insanity, like doing the same thing twice, what's
the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result.
Thank you. Exactly. It's not an isolated incident. Same thing's happening over and over and over, expecting a different result. So maybe this is the moment where they're like, okay, let's look at this.
Yeah. Well, if you want to learn more about restorative justice perspectives, there are ways to do that specifically with Amplify RJ. In the show notes, you can connect with DW's work at The Restorative Homie on Instagram and TikTok, and we'll link your email in the show notes description as well. And then on Thursday, we'll be back with a full conversation with DW and myself, exploring their journey with restorative justice work. So we hope you tune in for that. As always, like, rate, subscribe, share, and all the things. DW, thank you for your perspectives right now, and we'll talk on Thursday, and hope that you all join us.
Thanks for having me.